Good afternoon to everyone joining today. This is CVVC Africa's first of many webinars that we'll be hosting to you from Cape Town, South Africa. The beauty of this space is that we need not travel to attend such a great meeting. So we just want to say welcome to all of you near and far, and thank you for being here. Our intention for today's webinar is to create a like-minded community, which you are now a part of, and where we can build a successful African blockchain ecosystem together. For us, community is so important. As you know, it takes a village to raise a child, and to start a business, it takes a community to grow, nurture, and to build trust. We are very excited to have Fred here. He's from the Cardano Foundation. As I'm sure all of you know Fred, he has worked in the professional services and financial industries in Switzerland and Scandinavia, and focuses on capital markets, digital asset management, private banking, and the trading infrastructure. Fred is an expert, he is an outlier, and we are so excited to hear his stance. But before we hear it from Fred, let us go to Gideon, Managing Director of CVVC Africa. He will tell us what CVVC Africa has been doing on the ground.
Awesome, thanks, Stacey. I'm just going to share my screen in a moment, and I can take you through what's been happening. Right, welcome everybody. Really excited to be hosting this first webinar. We've had some amazing traction on the ground since we launched in July last year. It's been a really exciting time. I think everyone was really bullish on the prospects for Africa at CVVC, but in terms of the results that we have and in the engagements that we've had in the market and in the ecosystem and with different startups on the continent, it's by far exceeded our expectations. So we're very excited to see what's to come in Africa and in South Africa as we build this ecosystem. And on that note, after I speak, Tracy will speak a little bit more about CVVC and to unpack a little bit more about our organization. But very basically, we're a venture capital business launched in the crypto valley in 2018. Our model is not just traditional venture capital. We focus, first of all, only on startups that utilize blockchain. And we also call ourselves VC with a plus being that we create this ecosystem. So that business is called CV Labs, where we have these types of events. We bring the communities together, and we really try and create value for our portfolio companies to, once they become part of the CV Labs or CVVC community, they really have the opportunity and the ecosystem and the network to really accelerate their growth. As I mentioned, we launched rather in July last year. It was a very exciting time for us. And this was all made possible by our partners at the Swiss government. We've got a public-private partnership with SECO for the first year. They've really allowed us to, or they've seeded our launch into Africa with the primary focus of creating this ecosystem. And what does that mean? It's a very nice word to use, but for us, we believe there's so much potential on the African continent. And in the traditional space, we've seen a lot of traction, which I'll touch on in a moment as well. I think where the likes of SECO come in is that we can really collaborate and work together to get all the different players in the ecosystem that can help really excel the growth and education of different players in the market, from associations to government to regulators to corporates and to startups. So let's chat a little bit about our project overview. What have we been doing? What do we plan to do? So we launched in the middle of last year, and we sent out a call to action into Africa to announce our presence on the continent and to really say that, you know, we're looking for startups to apply for our incubation program, also for startups to do direct investments in as well. And we were astounded with the amount of applications that we received. We received more applications from startups in Africa than we did from the rest of the continent combined. And in fact, the incubation program that we held was predominantly startups from Africa, which was incredibly exciting for us. You can see a couple of photos here on the slide of our cohort that occurred over the last couple of months. They graduated recently at the end of January. We in the process of having a bit of a merger between our global program and what is to be soon our African exclusive accelerator. So these startups would come into our global program, but they have a boot camp week, attend different events and workshops, and so on. Our goal is to really migrate that process to have a African-specific accelerator, and we plan to have that running by the middle of this year. And beyond that, our goal is to invest in 100 startups on the African continent in the next 4 years, with the focus of really growing the ecosystem here in South Africa as a start, and then branching out into the rest of Africa, creating a crypto environment here in South Africa to really invest across the continent. I'll touch on it a little bit later, but the use cases from a blockchain perspective in Africa are very unique. So our focus is to really invest in startups that are addressing these problems that are specific to the African continent. So why startups in Africa? You'll see a couple more pictures that we had from our bootcamp week here last year. I think there's many reasons why Africa is exciting. I can speak to this for quite some time. I think one of the points worth noting is that the more developed world focuses a lot on the more speculative assets in the crypto economy. Well, I think Africa is really teaching us about the true use cases of blockchain. There's a lot of different use cases that we're starting to see come about that are unique to startups in Africa. When you think about blockchain, you think about trust, you think about traceability and transparency. I think those words really marry some of the problems that we see on the continent and can solve these issues. Outside of blockchain, the African economy has been booming in recent years, with 8 unicorns coming about in the last 2 years, 5 in the last year. Just this week, we've seen some amazing traction with 2 big startups being funded. Clickatel with $91 million in funding, Flutterwave increasing their valuation to $3 million after their $250 million raise. We believe that the new startups that are going to get this unicorn status will be blockchain ones. And other notes on the African continent that we're really excited about, according to the African Development Bank, 22% of working age Africans are starting their own businesses and are entrepreneurs. And that will allude to it being the highest entrepreneurship rate in the world. So we really believe that we've hit the continent at the perfect timing. And to end off on my side, I think the unique thing about CVVC is that we're creating a global ecosystem. We have offices across the globe. We're launching into it now as well. That we provide our companies when you come into our portfolio is that we don't just provide capital, allocate capital. We're also really introducing you into our family and giving you the best opportunity to link up into our community and our ecosystem to really excel your growth. But I'm really excited to meet a lot of you. We've got a Telegram group running as well, where we have different initiatives. We have a Startup Friday pitch on the group as well. Well, I'll add that to the group if anyone wants to join. I'll also post my email on the chat. If anyone wants to reach out to me at any time, please do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Gideon. Next up, we'll have a discussion on the creation of the Crypto Valley world and how did it come to be. We really give thanks to our global Swiss CVVC member, Tracy Trachsler. She's here today, and she is going to tell us all about the birthing story of how Crypto Valley came to be. Over to you, Tracy.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here as well. Let me get my presentation shareable for you guys. So as has already been mentioned, I have the pleasure of speaking you guys today just very briefly about sort of the blockchain ecosystem that we have been able to partake in and watch grow here in Crypto Valley. For those who may not be familiar with that term, I hope you are, but in case you are not, Crypto Valley specifically refers to Switzerland and Liechtenstein, and we've seen quite a bit of blockchain activity here in recent years. Now, Gideon already mentioned sort of what we do on the CVVC front, so I would like to hone in on what we do specifically at CV Labs. I am managing director of specifically CV Labs here in Switzerland and in Liechtenstein, and we are the so-called ecosystem arm of the company. So this means that we are responsible for feeding the community that has gathered in and around us with content, making sure that we provide sort of a network effect or the connector that helps startups plug into protocols, helps them plug into clientele, etc. And so as you see here, that takes a number of different forms. So of course we have sort of the CV Labs brand as both a co-working space and as a place where we organize different events. So everything from large scale events like conferences to small scale events like, let's say, thematic discussions and roundtables that focus on sort of hot topics at the time. So everything from taxation, corporate and personal taxation in crypto, to how do you set up shop in Switzerland or in a different jurisdiction, to what is happening with NFTs at the moment, how is DeFi developing, etc. So we try to really touch on sort of everything that could be relevant for the community and provide a platform on that front. Then we host a number of startup competitions or hackathons. Those are the CV competitions. Here we often partner with different industry partners in order to push specific initiatives that are, again, relevant for a company that is looking for a blockchain-based solution. And then, of course, we have the CV Summit. This is our flagship conference that we host here in Switzerland in Zug every year. Here you're looking at about 1,000 participants, but a couple thousand people that join virtually online, and we'll look forward to doing so again this year. Now we have discussed previously what Crypto Valley is in terms of the actual geographical location, but I'd love to take a closer look at what Crypto Valley is in terms of numbers. Now, in total, when you're looking at Switzerland, Liechtenstein, you're looking at roughly 1,128 companies that are operative in blockchain and are domiciled in either Switzerland or Liechtenstein. This is a fairly significant number for a country this small. When you compare it to Germany, for example, which is right next door and significantly larger in terms of landmass, they're looking at about 250 blockchain companies. So there is something special about Switzerland, it would seem, that has led to this mass of companies that have settled here. You're looking at in total about 6,002 people that work in the space amongst those 1,100 companies. And 14 of those 1,100 companies are unicorns. You'll be hearing from Fred, who represents one of those unicorns later, which is, of course, very exciting for us. And in total, what do those companies value at? You're looking at a staggering 611 billion. Of course, most of those 14 companies, I believe all of those 14 companies are protocols, which means that the foundations, et cetera, of course, have significant funds at their disposal that they reinvest into the community. So this is a very exciting number to look at. Now, why do we call Zug the heart of Crypto Valley? When you look here at where those companies are located, it's fairly obvious that there is a significant amount of traction specifically in Zug. So roughly half of the companies in this space are registered specifically in Zug. Neighboring Zurich has a fairly large cluster of companies as well. But there's a reason we call Zug the heart of Crypto Valley. At the same time, we also see that it definitely is all of Switzerland that needs to be included in that phrase, because the other half reside outside of Zug. And so it means that our purview really is to engage the community across all of Switzerland and Liechtenstein, and of course, then accordingly expand that globally as well. Now, I'm sure, or I hope you're all curious to find out just a bit more about how it is that we actually got here. Again, that's a significant number of blockchain companies that have chosen to domicile or build their projects here in Switzerland. And when you take a look at why that is, you can really see how the space has developed significantly over the past, let's say, 7 to 8 years. So the birth of Crypto Valley, we think, started in 2013. Here you saw the first 2 companies in the space that really chose strategically to make Switzerland its home at the time. The first, of course, was Bitcoin Swiss, followed by Lücke. And then shortly after, in 2014, we see the foundation of the Ethereum Foundation here in Zug. And more importantly, or equally importantly, we saw the first official paper on cryptocurrencies or virtual currencies published by the Swiss government. So this was, I believe, one of the first state-issued papers anywhere across the globe that tackled specifically this topic and placed it on the official state agenda. Then you kind of see the growth that slowly starts to pick up and then really takes off in 2017. Of course, with the ICO boom, you saw a lot of different quality companies that formed during that time. However, even after sort of the decline of the ICO boom, we still see that number drastically rise as we head into 2018, 2019. Now, we as CVVC are proud to say that we've been around since 2016. CV Labs followed shortly after in 2018, first in Zug and then in Vaduz as a second location, so that we could also tap into that Liechtenstein community as well. And we've been sort of maintaining both locations ever since. Now, what I would like to draw your attention to are two things. Of course, at the top, you see, again, an increasing number of projects, a lot of different protocols that joined the community, chose to make Switzerland their home due to a number of factors. I think the first and foremost, most likely, is that foundation law here in Switzerland is, of course, very clearly defined, even for protocol foundations. And so it seemed like a natural choice, I believe, for a lot of protocols. But more importantly, you see there in 2017, you had the founding of the Swiss Blockchain Federation. This is an official task force or lobbying body that works very closely with Swiss Parliament in order to advise them and offer them direct connections to the industry itself. So you really have government working very closely with industry officials, industry builders that are able to give active feedback on how or on their experience, particularly on the regulatory front. So then when you move into 2018, you start to see sort of that regulatory landscape start to adapt and really make sure that it is inclusive in the way that it treats these new emerging technologies, which is always a huge let's say a huge challenge for any government to try and enter that space. So we saw the first ICO guidelines that came out in 2020 as an answer to the ICO boom. And then 2019, 2020, 2021, we saw the rollout of a number of sort of new adjustments or amendments to existing laws, the most notable of which was in 2020 when they rolled out a number of amendments, which I'll get to in a second. But also very important is the first banking licenses that were issued between 2019 and 2020. So here we have very proudly two Swiss banks that are Swiss crypto banks. So we have Signum on one hand and SEBA on the other, both of whom I think are close to reaching unicorn status. So we'll have the first sort of really homegrown non-protocol unicorns that we'll get to look to shortly, I believe. And of course, even more exciting is that you see here in 2020 and 2021, even during the COVID crisis, it seemed as though the local blockchain industry was fairly robust and resistant to a lot of the COVID economic downturns that we saw in other industries. So that, of course, was very promising and is a promising feature as we look into the future. Now, I mentioned before that regulation played a big part in sort of the development of the Swiss ecosystem, and I'd like to address quickly why. So we're big believers that regulation matters, and most notably in 2020, the Swiss Parliament passed the so-called DLT Blanket Act. So this selectively adapted 10 existing federal laws. Three sort of key adaptations included: one, a license for DLT trading facilities; two, sort of increased legal certainty for insolvency law. So how do you segregate crypto assets in the event of bankruptcy? And third, the introduction of uncertified securities. So what made Switzerland sort of special in this approach is that you see when you look to the US, et cetera, a lot of these jurisdictions that have dealt with the blockchain topic for an extensive period of time, but haven't really been able to make any headway in terms of defining specific legislative action. Switzerland decided to, instead of going back and introducing new laws to handle these types of assets, they decided to simply amend existing laws in order to make room for blockchain. And I think this approach in particular made them fairly agile in terms of reacting to sort of the increasing demand without necessarily sacrificing a lot of the security aspects. So blockchain technology is treated the same way as essentially any technology that is regulated, right? And then as needed, there will be room or space to discuss additional regulations that need to be introduced. But I think this was a very smart move on the Swiss government side, and certainly has helped sort of the boom that we see now in the last, let's say, 12 to 24 months in terms of the projects that are not just sort of forming in Switzerland, but that are also relocating from other locations. So yeah, here we see sort of the different actors that all partake in this community, in this ecosystem. So Switzerland, again, is a fairly mixed bunch. So everything from financial markets to very strong academic institutions, a variety of different industries that are represented, sort of active involvement from the politician side, the legislative side, and of course, sort of an ever growing and expanding startup network. To come back to what we had discussed initially with regards to CVVC, what we do, and CV Labs and what we do, our goal really is to tap into that sort of long list of stakeholders that we saw in the previous slide and support them in any way that we can. So whether that's through providing capital to startups, through providing a home to blockchain companies, to providing a network and a platform where the community can interact with the events, et cetera, that really has helped us sort of not just solidify our own place within the blockchain community here, but really sort of foster that community and help it grow into what it is today. And I speak not just on my behalf, but I hope also on the behalf of Gideon when I say that the idea or the wish really is that we're able to sort of replicate that evolution that we've seen here in Switzerland, particularly with the growth of not just the number of stakeholders in the space, but also the active involvement on sort of the regulatory side, the evolution of capital being deployed, et cetera, in the space, and really, see that kind of development in the African landscape. So that's it from me. Thank you so much for giving me some time, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I'll hand it back over to you, Stacey.
Thank you, Tracy. So as we said earlier, community is really crucial in building an ecosystem, and it is also about collaboration. CVVC Africa is privileged to work with the Swiss government in a one-year public-private partnership, just as Gideon mentioned earlier. Without our Swiss partners, we would not have achieved our footprint on the map. So let's understand the importance of collaboration from our head of private sector development, Liliana. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and for this opportunity to be here today. It's an exciting partnership we entered. I'm glad to give you some background. So ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, it is really an honor to be addressing you on behalf of the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, SECO. SECO is responsible for the economic development cooperation of Switzerland, focusing mostly on middle-income countries like South Africa. And it is part of the Ministry of Economy, Education and Research, and therefore puts really the private sector development and innovation in the focus of our activities. We know that development, job creation, and poverty reduction is reached through innovation and the private sector. And conducive framework conditions can help to accelerate this development. And this is where the public and the private sector and other actors such as academia or the NGOs are coming together. And it's in this context that SECO is funding this project, the blockchain ecosystem in South Africa, implemented by Crypto Valley Venture Capital, as you've heard, a Swiss-based company. And basically, it has two outcomes that we are supporting. So firstly, the development of an ecosystem for all stakeholders involved in the development of the blockchain technologies, and to develop an incubation program for startups solving challenges faced in Africa using blockchain technology. So it's really also, you hear a lot about the SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and it's really also to contribute on solving these global challenges, specifically through blockchain technology. which can be, applied on energy questions, value chain issues, and so on and so forth, in finance, of course. And CVVC, as was mentioned, invests in startups and links the startups with other investors. So it's the investment side, but then it's much broader, the overall ecosystem that we're looking at. You've heard it, but I have to emphasize it again because it is important. Switzerland has been at the forefront of the development of the novel and promising blockchain technology in recent years. With the blockchain law that was passed in 2020, a legal environment was created, and it has really attracted a lot of companies, promising companies with over 1,100 companies and employing 6,000 people out of 14 companies that are called so-called unicorns. So we really see that it has become an important part of the economy in the country and of driving innovation. And this is really at the heart for every country that wants to move a step ahead, that we have to look into new technology. At the same time, really our focus is this development focus at an investment level. So how can we harness this technology for using, for solving problems of society, of companies, and of environmental issues, and really creating this framework. We have really found that in South Africa there is a mature situation where the government and the private sector has shown interest in this blockchain technology and wants to really harness the benefits. And that provided the perfect ground to enter this, this partnership, to collaborate, to transfer the knowledge and experience gained in Crypto Valley of Switzerland to the African continent. I believe that to support South Africa and beyond South Africa, the continent, in harnessing the benefits of the fourth industrial revolution is really key. And we have seen with the pandemic that this whole digitalization has again, jumped exponentially. And the value added that SECO can bring in is really this ecosystem aspect, which means that it goes again beyond individual investments. It's an approach we have applied in other areas when it comes to startup investments, where we really support to bring all the relevant actors together to really use these energies and make a vision a reality. This is now the first time that we engage on supporting an ecosystem for startups using blockchain technology. And so usually we're technology agnostic, but this seemed to be a particular match where Switzerland has a value added, where it's a big breakthrough on technology that can really bring benefits very clearly. And beyond that, we have seen that this ecosystem approach, when you look at funds invested and the jobs that are created, it's a very beneficial ratio compared to other programs where you also invest maybe more in direct investment. So there seems to be a good value for money proposition in supporting an ecosystem with a longer term vision to create jobs. So in in general, this fits very well with SECO's mandate of supporting private sector development globally in different continents and different countries. Also because the private sector creates 9 out of 10 jobs. So really it has a powerful role to play. And of course, dynamic and innovative companies are key for sustainable economic growth. They stimulate new ideas througto competition for ideas, goods and services. So we really look forward to be part of it. Now, by bringing together all the different actors, the idea is again to kickstart the process, to support and to accelerate this development. It might have happened without us, but I believe that by consciously bringing together everyone, one can really accelerate this development for the benefit of the whole country and beyond. And so it's great today to kickstart this development. And let me also say that we believe it fits particularly well also in our portfolio that SECO has in South Africa. So we have been working on digitalization skills and entrepreneurship more broadly. For example, through the Financial Sector Development Reform Program, which is already in a second phase. SECO supported the development of the FinTech vision. SECO also supports entrepreneurship through the Boost program implemented by the African Development Bank. There again, it's also about startups on the African continent, looking at technical assistance, looking at investment possibilities and at the ecosystem again. We have a partnership with Business Partners Limited and their technical assistance facility to support individual companies with arrangements that can that they have to pay for, but it's interest free and it looks at their liquidity so that it's quite a flexible way on how they can repay. But that has also, this partnership has also supported the retention and the creation of new jobs. And finally, it's a sound business enabling environment is key. And we have been working with IFC, the International Finance Corporation, as part of the World Bank, on addressing and improving the business environment, an area that the government has been also committed. And this is really key in the long term. Let me add also that Switzerland and also the Swiss embassy in Pretoria has been active in the area of blockchains. We have a science office and the Swiss Business Hub in Africa. There is the Swiss Blockchain Federation that inspired the creation of the South African Blockchain Alliance. So now the South African Blockchain Alliance is a key partner in any blockchain related project, which I think is great because it's really local institutions that then will carry on the agenda. And so the embassy has participated in the Africa Blockchain Conference, the Africa FinTech Festival in Mauritius, the South African participation at the Swiss Blockchain Hackathon in 2019, and the support of South African students at the Swiss Blockchain Summer School of the University of Zurich. And other projects were the implementation of a blockchain challenge together with the University of Cape Town, the ATH Zurich Entrepreneurs Club and the University of Zurich, and then the recent initiative for the establishment of a bilateral research chair in blockchain technology. So you see, academia is very strong and is a strong partner in this ecosystem endeavor.
Thank you, Liliana. I'm just mindful of time, so if you want to just wrap it up there and just give us your final note, we really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Now I'm coming, in fact, to my end. So I really think that it's a great kickstart today, and we are really looking together to working with all of you, and to make this ecosystem strong and vibrant, and so that the potential can be fully used. Thank you.
Thank you, Liliana, and to everyone at SECO for your contribution and for your teamwork. We really appreciate it. And now for our main event, sitting in Zurich, we welcome the CEO of the Cardano Foundation, Fred. Thank you, Fred. We are so excited to have you here. Should anyone wish to ask a question, you can either raise your hand or you can continue in the chat box, and then we'll go to questions at the end. But for now, Fred, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. As many probably know, Africa has a big heart for the Cardano Foundation, but also for the Cardano protocol, and it's one of the areas we focus on. So today I've been asked to speak a little bit about how protocols collaborate with ecosystems, and what is really this importance of a successful ecosystem. I'm a little bit mindful of time, and I'm probably one of those people who can speak a lot, and I always see that there's a lot of questions. So if I speak too fast or something, just raise it in the chat, and I'm sure somebody will ask me to slow down or do something about it.
Fred, just before you carry on, if you just want to go to your full screen, because I'm seeing your actual desktop with just a small part of the screen. Yeah. Just want to enlarge your screen. There we go.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. It worked pretty well in testing, I think. See what we can do about that, Maybe if we switch this around a bit.
There we go. Thanks, Fred.
Is this better?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
All right. So the truth is that trust is probably the only legal performance enhancing drug. But trusting a system when no one is in charge is a journey reaching about 100 years of culture and development in manufactured trust. Now, trust is in many ways like the air we breathe. When it's present, nobody really notices it. But when it's absent, everybody notices it immediately. And the main point of talking about trust right now in terms of ecosystems is that there actually exist quite a few different blockchains and quite a few of what we call protocols. And it can be quite confusing to actually understand, when is it important that there's a vibrant ecosystem, and when is it important that the ecosystem not only collaborates and builds upon the protocol, but they actually support the protocol. And I think this is an extremely important difference. And when we look into game theory and motivations and why you should engage and why you shouldn't engage, this is probably the graphics might not be the best, but this is the biggest slide I will show you today. So on the top, we really have what we call permissionless and public blockchains. So this is typically a blockchain like Cardano or like Bitcoin, where there's no access barriers. Everybody can be there. We share all of the GitHub repositories. That means that every part of research we do is open, is shareable. We invested several $100 million in research, and it's all available. All the code is available. And to a certain extent, we all hope that we can get a really large third-party contribution to not just the ecosystem, but also the code base. If we walk down into the south of this equation, what we have is what we call permissionless and private blockchain. or permissioned and private blockchain. And if we start with the last one, this is actually the blockchain ecosystem we're seeing getting traction these days. So outside the little world of, let's say, startups and people who's trying something off and who's being really puristic around what they do, the enterprises are actually mainly adopting on permission private blockchains. And why is this a big difference, and why am I speaking about trust here? Well, the thing is that if you run a permission and private blockchain, this is a software as a service business model. And what that really means is that if you'll be a large company, or if you'll be a hospital, or if you'll be anybody who actually deals in, let's say, real life enterprise applications, who might have the ability of making people jobless, or have the ability of a surgery in a hospital goes wrong and so forth, they're having a hard time actually going to the Ethereums and the Cardanos and the Bitcoins of the world. Because down in the permission private world, you can calculate the cost of a transaction very easily. It's a software as a service. It's a very centralized model. You can sign a contract, like a master service agreement, directly with the vendor or the centralized entity who issues that. Or if it's a conglomerate, you can do the same, like R3/4. You can actually govern your own data, and you can create small, let's say, mini clouds down there, which basically just is about your business and your business area and architecture. So when we look down there, the protocols down there is typically extremely well funded. From a regulatory perspective, the risk is very low, but the rewards down there is also extremely low. And what you see down there is the protocols typically work with the participant, either through an industry collaboration or simply through funding. So they're funding a company which is interesting, or a startup to look up there, but the ecosystem and the distribution are often very limited compared to what the opportunities are when you go more north up in the chart. So today I'm going to focus, obviously also being from Cardano, I'll focus a little bit more on the permissionless and public part, but if any of you have some questions about where the value add and where the drops are, we're very happy to speak about it. So why is it I'm saying that the risk, not just the risk for the protocol, but also the risk for the entrepreneur or the risk of the stakeholder who wants to operate with a permissionless public blockchain, is higher when you go up? Well, the thing is that there is a lot of legal uncertainty. And one of the reasons we are in Switzerland is that there is very clear guidelines. It might not be the best guidelines in terms of return or in terms of entrepreneurship and so on, but from a regulatory perspective, Switzerland is extremely clear. What is the security token? What's a utility token? What's a protocol? What kind of incorporation can you do? How do we pay our taxes? How do we ensure that liability are managed? All those things have become very clear in Switzerland. And I think that's is de-risking Switzerland as a country very much. However, it is so that in many countries, including Switzerland, but to a lesser degree, there is a lot of unclarity on the north side. It has huge distribution. In Cardano, for instance, we have about 4 million people, 3 to 4 million people, who every day when they wake up, the first thing they do is something on the Cardano protocol. That can be they write a piece of code. That can be they build an application on top of Cardano. It can be that they're doing a tweet. It can be that they are interacting in a Telegram group. It can be that they go to the local regulator and applies for a license. But we really see this huge and vibrant ecosystem, which is evolving there. Secondly, is about distribution, because when you have a permissionless public blockchain, what you really need is you need the ecosystem to run the blockchain, not just to build upon the blockchain. And this is the biggest difference there probably is from the north side, the top of the slide, and the south side of the slide. So we are actually relying on currently around 3,500 stake pool operators to run our blockchain. We don't know who they are. We know quite a few of them based on their interaction with them and trying to improve the architecture or the incentive models and so forth. But they are running the blockchain. We are not running the blockchain. We might be a part of building the blockchain, but there is also a lot of other companies who is helping us to build the blockchain already. So when we start thinking that through, it also means that, there is no centralized entity who is, the sole spider in the web and holds all of the funds and so forth. And this is a very different ecosystem than you will find maybe in other blockchain ecosystems, or you will find in a traditional business network. The other part, which is very interesting, is that the community up here in the permissionless public blockchain in the Cardano's aspect, they actually hold the keys to what we call the decentralized treasury. So what do I mean about saying holding the keys? It means that there is a voting mechanism already there, and I will talk more about it in a few minutes, see how far we get. which means that the community can vote on who is going to get a grant from the protocol. Again, here, this is quite different. So you do see there's permissionless public blockchains who has a voting mechanism. You see there is some who has an indication mechanism. You see some who don't have it, but it's more, you have to apply for grants. But the fact that the community can have what we call active participation. And the goal here is that the community itself should take over the blockchain and evolve that as a prime piece of infrastructure, a layer 1 infrastructure upon which you can change the world and you can do certain things. So what is it really we're building? Well, we're building a financial and social operating system, which allows you to represent value, identity, and governance all in one place. And that is a very different composition than if you think about the first layer 1 or layer 2, or the first generation of protocols who came out there. They were able to do a transaction from 1 to 1 or 1 to many, many to 1 or many to many. And there was only one type of identity. There was only one type of value, in this case, Bitcoin, for instance, right? And there was a very limited way of governance. It was a very good way of governance. It's very hard to do an attack on Bitcoin. It's very hard to do change there, which means that your assets is quite safe there, and it used very well for one use case. But as you come down into the different protocols and the different generations, you see that actually what you want to do is you want to have the ability to represent millions of different assets and different kinds of value. And those value is not always financial. It can easily be a paper value, an intellectual property right, a deed for a land registry. It can be, even, it can nearly be everything what you can think of. Currently on the Cardano blockchain, we have about 2.5 million different kinds of value representations. So you can think about it as different ISIN numbers or different, categories and so on, which is represented on our blockchain today, outside our native token. The other part is that, of course, the native token plays a very big role here, because the native token is what gives you access to the community who is actually maintaining and operating the protocol. Now, when I say maintaining, we are still in early days with Cardano, so the main maintenance is still happening out of a federated pool of entities. But the goal very clearly is that this is going to be handed over to the community. The other part is, and I know this is not so fancy these days, is what about the 2 billion people who sits, for instance, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, and other parts of the world who don't have an official identity? They're actually per de facto cut away from financial markets, cut away from health insurance, cut away from different parts of systems and operating systems, which we take for granted very often in more developed countries. And we don't find that's fair. Because by actually opening up for what is an identity, you're not only opening up for access to capital markets and paying your taxes and so forth, but you're also opening up to a wide variety of what kind of identity do you actually need to have in order to get a P2P lending. So if you want to do a mortgage, or you want to do just borrow $100 on the market in Ethiopia or in Tanzania, well, you can easily pay you can easily pay 80%, if not more, for borrowing those $100 if you have no identity, you have no credit scoring and so forth. But what we see is actually the community is able to do a very good credit scoring. The community is able to use blockchain to de-risk your exposure. And we see a lot of people in the Western countries, even though interest rate is rising, who have a very keen interest if they can lower the barrier of, let's say, entry, but also the barrier of transparency. They're very much willing to maybe borrow out at a rate of maybe even 3% or 4%. And I think that creates a totally different value proposition if you're looking for microfinancing or even normal finances for SMEs in Africa and other developed countries. So this extended scope of what identity is extremely important from that use case, but it's also extremely important from the regulatory use case. As you see, the regulatory view is sweeping in over blockchain country, and a lot of people speaking about AML and FATCA and all those things. And there's a lot of beautiful business models on that. For instance, I've just spent 2 weeks in Accra, in Ghana, and in the surroundings, Takoradi and so forth. And what you see is that everybody there is an MTN. MTN is a local carrier where you have MTN money, so digital money on your phone, and you can basically pay for nearly everything on that. And there's a link to an identity, but there's also a link to a database which shows your past transactions. And for P2P lending, you would actually only need the transaction part. You wouldn't need the actual passport or the actual identification documents as we know it today. And last but not least, governance. I think one of the largest points and problems I see all over the world is that we're all a little bit worried about, how do I interact? How do I vote? How do I know that my vote is counted? How do I know that my business, if I build a business on blockchain, that is safe, that it doesn't disappear tomorrow, that I can participate, that I can actually get access to, in our case, the decentralized treasury, or I can, be a part of moving the blockchain to a certain use case. So we feel very deeply and very rooted about that we are an infrastructure. We don't think that the people from Silicon Valley or from Zurich or Zug in Switzerland, that we can solve the problems of emerging countries. We think if we give the tools and the local education is there, I think Africa will be able to solve their local problems in the best way compared to taking, let's say, a European solution or an American solution. But that also means that you will need to be able to influence the protocol, influence the features, influence the capital distribution. In short, you have to participate in the democracy, and you have to be able to do that without being judged, without being, trolled or anything like that. And that is in the internet of today is actually a hard value proposition. So Cardano today, as you know or might not know, we only had smart contracts for around 7 months or something. There is probably a lot of companies which I'm not aware of, but I'm aware of, and my team, including the team of IOG and Emurgo, we have contact to about 350 projects who's building and launching on Cardano right now. We know of around 40 who's already ready to launch or has launched already. We are the number 1 in governance, the number 1 in security, and the number 1 in decentralization, and the number 1 in efficiency. However, we do have a couple of issues. As I said, we're not 100% there. When you look at this picture, and I'm sure that the slides can be distributed afterwards, you will see that there's different categories. There's something about lending and borrowing, and in my opinion, this is just too small right now. We have launch pads. The difference between a launch pad and a traditional venture capital fund might not be that big, other than the where they live and how they run with data. There's identity solutions, stable coins, wallets, gaming, and all sorts of things. And I think there's a lot of different ways you can actually work with the protocol. But to do that, you always need to ask the first questions, which I was mentioning to you. Basically, who decides and who governs? So who decides where the money goes, and who decides where the future of the protocol is, and how can you ensure that you can become part of that? So how does active participation through community innovation look with us? So I know I'm running a little bit out of time here, but I heard that I can go a few minutes over. So let's just focus on a few things. So I think there's really 3 things which is important to think about. It's innovation, not just on the protocol, not on the layer 1, so the infrastructure, but also on the layer 0. So how do we actually innovate on it? How do you distribute the treasury? How do you distribute the decision power of where we're going and where we're focusing? And how do you ensure execution, including checks and balances, that what the community decides actually are being delivered? How do you solve wicked problems together? So if you have an amazing problem you want to solve, a local problem, maybe in Zanzibar, something like that, about import and export or taxes on fishing, how do you actually get to a place that you can find other people, that you can collaborate with people who might not even be sitting in Zanzibar? How do you get access to global talent? How do you get help to define problems and deploy these solutions in your local market? And how do you measure the return? Maybe that's a financial return, maybe that's a community growth. How can you actually ensure that your community grows based on the solution you choose? We are doing all that together on a platform called IdeaScale, where we already have thousands and thousands of contributors. That means that you can go there, you can share your problem with a potential solution, and you get direct access to the Cardano network of developers, the Cardano network of business people, enterprise architects, compliance people, and so forth. And most of the time, they will actively engage with you. Sometimes they will ask you hard questions. Sometimes they would like to join your team. Sometimes you will probably join another team. But all of that can end up in a situation where one of our funds, so we have a set of funds coming through this treasury function, might be able to kickstart you. But with this, you also get a lot of access to knowledge, to interaction, and so forth. So this is really about how do we set challenges, how do we innovate together, and how do you vote for your favorite ideas. In the start, we've taken a little bit of a different approach. So we actually pay people to vote. So when people are willing to sit down and look at a problem and maybe even give some feedback and actually vote on it, we actually think that they deserve to get paid. We are hoping over time that the output of these complex decisions and the voting doesn't need to have a financial reward, but the financial reward is your how biased or how much capital in terms of your business or the smart contracts you're running or the native assets you're engaging with will become a part of your life, and you become a blockchain citizen. And by that, maybe the financial incentive is not so important, but it's the real value, the utility you're getting out of the ecosystem, who will allow you to vote or who will make you go through the hoops and the rings and sit down and do these complex decisions. There's tons of different ways of looking at it. I will share the slides here, right? There's obviously absolute liquid democracy. So the ability to cast a vote, to check that the vote is in the ballot, to check that the vote is counted in the right way. This is what we call inclusive accountability. So the ability for you not to trust somebody that they counted your vote, or to trust that the vote has been in, it's a yes or no, or project 1 or 2, or smart contract X or Y, but your ability to check that, but also your ability to check that what does the other people on the blockchain voting. And if you then see that you are casting a vote and you want to call that back, you're actually able to do that as well. So if you actually you want to vote to a politician, a blockchain politician who loves to dissect the intricacies of a blockchain, you can do that and then share the rewards of the vote. And if he then does something you don't like, well, you can take your vote back. So in this way, it doesn't become something where, you have to sit with somebody representing you for a year or half a year, but it's something where you can actually, based on people's actions, you can just cast your vote, but you can also draw it back and actually show the stakeholders of the ecosystem, but also of a company or of a state, that you are unhappy with the direction they're taking and they're not representing your free will or the way you would like them to go, even though they might have more knowledge or might use more time on it. I think inclusive accountability is one of the things I want to really spend a few thoughts on, and maybe give you one example of how we work with an ecosystem, but also how the ecosystem works with us and how it all becomes a snowball effect. I think a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they shall never sit. What I mean about that is that any ecosystem, any kind of platform need to have an entity, or need to have it doesn't need to be an incorporation, but they need to have somebody who's looking beyond the absolute returns of tomorrow, beyond the token price, beyond the decision making of optimizing for tomorrow, but really looking at how can we make something last for the next 10, 20, 1 generation, 2 generations. We need to look at the long run. Secondly, until we can leave this spaceship called Earth, well, we are all in it together, whether we like it or not. We can try and isolate us somewhere, or we can try and build some big walls, or we can we can build an ark. But whatever we do, we're actually sitting on the same spaceship, and we need to stand and fall with the decisions the world population makes. What we wanted to do was we wanted to engage with our community and see if we could lower the entry barrier to do something for good on a blockchain, which normally is associated with, quick wins or, DeFi or other things. How can we actually do that? And what we chose was to look at a land restoration project, specifically in Kenya, in a river delta, who has been unfortunately deforested due to the local economy was not very good. So they took down the trees. When the trees was down, there was no roots out in the water. No roots, there's no fish, there's no fishermen. And suddenly everybody was moving to the big city. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to show, what does it mean with inclusive accountability? The ability for you as a blockchain citizen operating on a blockchain to be able to verify if somebody tells you that they are doing something, that they actually are doing it. Whether that is the person who buys a tree in Kenya, or whether that is the tree reforestation project with people on the ground in Kenya who is saying that they actually planted a tree. How do you know that if you're sitting in South Africa or you're sitting in Nigeria? It's a pretty far way to check that in Kenya. So what we did is we wanted to solve a couple of problems we know existed with these kind of solutions. One was the double spend, one was the lack of transparency, the lack of community involvement, the data that is non-standardized, and the lack of these data feedback loops. So what we did was we created a system. This is just talking about how green it is, but we created a system where when you use one token, you actually got one tree. When this tree is planted, it's a non-fungible token. That means that your your ADA, your one ADA who is equivalent to that tree, that is always having a direct line of control, meaning that one ADA doesn't go to one random tree, but it goes to one actual tree, which has a geographical location. There's a geo-tracking going on. There's people checking it, and you have a feedback loop which is coming back. But you can also see the regulatory information into that contract. You can get updates. You can get all sorts of things happening in there. A certificate was then issued. This is a picture of one of these certificates, where you basically can see how many trees which is belonging to you. But you can also see what kind of trees it is. So you can see this is mangroves, which is basically needs about 25 years. You can see how much CO2 they're doing. You can see how much the area is and so forth. And if you have the ability to it, which is what we give everybody, but we obviously cannot guarantee that you have the computer skills to do so, you can go in on the blockchain outside a censorship resistant system and check yourself whether that specific ADA you use is actually in that specific tree, and you can check everybody else's actions in there as well. And that's the same way you do when you do voting. The beauty of this is that even though we would have had the capital to invest 1 million trees, we didn't pay as a foundation one single tree. Well, a lot of us, including myself, we might have bought some trees. I can definitely assure you that. But all of this money was raised out of an hypothesis about if you actually create a system with inclusive accountability, where the double spending and the greenwashing was really clearly mitigated on the blockchain using that system, you will suddenly also see a community of people who might not normally care about impact investment, or would not normally care about, Africa or Kenya, that they suddenly engage in this. This is a sign that there's a whole new type of people which is emerging on our spaceship today. And these people, they care much more about the impact they leave and about what's actually happening than what we've seen has happened before. Last, but I'm 6 minutes over time. I don't know if you want me to round off now, or you want to speak a little bit more of monetary policy around these topics.
No, Fred, go ahead. I think some people have actually mentioned in the chat for you to continue. So please go ahead. No rush.
All right. So what I just want to kind of end up with, because there's two sides of a coin, specifically with a public and a permissionless blockchain. One is this ability to build on the blockchain, like I just showed you, and give you the option of inclusive accountability, of native assets, of using smart contracts, and basically building a business, a global business, wherever you are, as long as you have an internet connection, which can allow you to feed your family or build a business and get staff and change your community. Now, the other one is, how do you actually ensure that a public blockchain like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Cardano would actually also survive in the future? And now this is obviously a tricky question and has multiple parameters, but I think the one part which I would like to touch upon today is that the monetary policies are extremely important. So even though we are in the midst of a revolution around governance, where we see that macro politics and regulation and Ukraine and other things are taking a large role in where blockchains are going, there's a great number of participants entering the blockchain ecosystem at different stages who has different motivations. And we see that the actors are actually coming together and deciding for a common good for the ecosystem, and not just for economic value. But we also see that there's a new value arriving, and these treasury models are actually evolving over time. Very often these treasury models is so that when the initiation of these projects was done, some money was carved aside for the future development of the project. But in a situation where they say the token price is stable, what happens when there is not enough, let's say, financial incentive for putting your computing power, or for putting your skills, or for doing other things and making that available to the network, then basically the treasury will diminish over time. How do you then add to that treasury? Well, you do that by taking a fee for transactions. So there is some sound logic in always being a bit skeptical around how can I ensure that these protocols also become economical viable over time, and what is actually incentivizing them. Therefore, I always encourage people to look a little bit at the tokenomics, as we call it. So what is actually feeding the blockchain and what is detracting value from the blockchain. And in the end, if you think about what I said earlier about how you interact and why the community is so important on these permissionless blockchains, I said that the community actually runs the blockchain. The stake pool operators, they run the versions of the blockchain. They ensure the immutable truth. They ensure that the versions of the software is accurate, and all of these blocks are being produced, and the protocol will then basically give them a reward. On the other note, if there is nobody building on the blockchain, if there's no real value to be had on the blockchain, if the blockchain is only a token, which is being bought or sold, well, it's becoming quite clear then that you need to have a lot of transactions of people who is willing to only do that one use case of buying and selling to basically foster a vibrant ecosystem who can keep injecting money into the startups, into the future development of the tech stack, into quantum security and zero knowledge proof and so forth. So how it is with our blockchain is that a part of the transaction fee you're spending is then going back into the decentralized treasury, and a part of it is going into the stakeholders, so in our case, the stake pool operators who runs the blockchain, which is none of the federated entities who was behind the original version of the blockchain. Now, this is extremely interesting when you think about it, because that basically means that the public permissionless blockchains, they stand and fall with the activity of the community. And I say the activity is not just the willingness to build, the willingness to contribute, but it is the willingness to sacrifice economic value to get access to the utility of the blockchain. Which basically means, are they willing to pay to use the smart contracts? Are they willing to pay to use the transactions, the metadata, the native assets? If they are not willing to do so, well then, let's say in a stable economy where the token value is not moving up or down, most of these monetary policies will basically run out of money. And then you will see that the only model who exists is blockchains who somehow magically can mint money out of the blue, a little bit like what we see with nation states and central banks are able to do today, right? That they can basically just print money as they see needed, which is against what we believe on in blockchain world, right? Where we would like to have a situation where the algorithm, where there is a binary transparency of the actual assets and how much can actually be minted on it, because we want to have a situation where we have an inflation guarantee and where we actually can say what is the real value of the token based on the utility you get. So in Cardano, we encourage, and the Cardano Foundation is much about ensuring that we see social good on the blockchain, but it's also about how do we increase, and this sounds it's not so intuitive, but how do we increase the spending of people's transactions? So it's not about how do we put up the price for a transaction, but how do we ensure that people are willing to spend more ADA in our case by writing more advanced smart contracts, by putting patient data online, by ensuring that the custom services can work with a really truly decentralized protocol and they can trust the neighboring countries, by ensuring that there's a diversity of identity solutions on there. So the more data you trust on the blockchain, the more you will pay for that data. But the economic value has to be the same as what you're willing to give. Otherwise, the network will not live on forever. So that being said, we actually live and fall by our ability to work with the communities, to work with the stakeholders, not just the one who build on a public permissionless blockchain like Cardano, or the nation states who are adopting our technology, or the central banks who's right now using us and so forth, but also the community, that they are actually willing and able to take over the responsibility of our project, run it in the future, and ensure that we have this, beyond the founding fathers, because we do believe that the crowd takes better decision over time over a genius one-person show. So that's actually what I wanted to talk about. I always get a question of how do I get more involved? And I like to give maybe a shout out and say that specifically in Africa, we are looking for people who knows the Cardano community or knows the proof of stake community very well, who is willing to help us to drive community involvement in Africa. And you can find the links for some of that on our webpage. we're always encouraging people to start looking at assets. So we have a lot of, I think we have 72 different projects where you can see the source code directly on our developer portal. So you can basically find inspiration, just take the source code or write to the developers who actually did the source code and then ask them for help and so forth. But you can basically just change a few things and then it might actually work where you are. But you can also just start, taking some of our content either on Telegram, on Reddit, or on Twitter and so forth. But I think the idea is we open up the mic a bit and we might speak about community involvement and why it's so important for permissionless blockchains. And if we divert a bit from the topic, I think that's also okay.
Thank you, Fred. Just for the record, everyone said, please continue, please continue, please continue. So there was an echo of people saying, please continue. And I think you could talk to us all night and we'd still be sitting here. So thank you so much for all of that. I've got two questions for you so far, Fred. The first one is from Pradeep Damle. I hope I've pronounced your surname correctly, otherwise forgive me. He says, does the advent of blockchain potentially remove the necessity of intellectual property rights as all aspects of research is openly available?
Oh, that's a very interesting question, huh? So there is two lines of thought here, right? If you look into academic research, we actually see that the academic research was exponentially increasing when there was what we call open source licensing agreements between the universities, which allowed one university to use the data from another university and so forth. So by pooling the diverse thoughts, you got much more progress in technology. Now, there is, of course, the centralized business models of today, specifically pharma healthcare, who's saying, we spend 1 billion to get a cancer product out there. Now we want to reap the benefits because in our portfolio, we might have 20 products who didn't make it, right? So we believe that in blockchain, specifically where we are in the world today, intellectual property right has a place to be, but not on the actual protocol. The protocol should be open for everybody. It should be so that wherever you are in the world, you have the access to the protocol and be able to use that and build upon it. If you have a very specific use case where you want to protect your intellectual property right, just be aware that the blockchain community might not support you on that. So you need to think about how the operating model will be. I think in the future, you will see that if we're going to continue evolving as humans and continue evolving with how we interact with technology, we need to be much more open because the human involvement has not been exponential as we saw the technology involvement has been. And a part of that is because we are trying to protect our good ideas. But the fact is that most of the time, these good ideas, they're already taken. It's our ability to execute who's important. And the blockchain gives us the mean to come together across countries, across geographical destination, nation states, and culture to interact in a predefined environment where we can actually put contracts in place, which basically allow you to reap the benefits of working together. So I do think there is a trend towards open source and doing that.
Thank you, Fred. And for the last question for this evening, Daniel Cogsell has asked, what are the chances of getting someone from IOG to host an intensive 3 to 6 month course on their academic papers to understand the Cardano blockchain a bit better?
We're already doing that. So I think that's it's just about signing up. We're actually opening up a school in Accra in Ghana, where Lars is going to teach. He's the main educational person there, right? And also at the university in Edinburgh, depending on your skills, of course, right? Because some of these papers are, very mathematical proven. You need to have some understanding of this, right? But you also can interact with us at the University of Edinburgh, but also a ton of other universities, including University of Zurich and so forth. We're also opening up a department, I think, in the University of in Japan. Emurgo, one of the other federated entities, that actually has like 6 different educational programs where there is some of the end stage of these, which goes into these part, including the Ouroboros. And we as the foundation also will be rolling out later, maybe probably end of this year, some foundational part, right? So what the question I think here was really around these papers, the research papers. By the way, all the research papers is available on IOG's webpage, and you can find links to it on cardano.org.
Thank you, Fred. Okay, I think that's it for today's webinar. We just want to say thank you again to all our panelists from Switzerland. It's been an absolute pleasure to our audience. So thank you for your time. At CVVC Africa, we're committed to reshaping the African landscape, and we want to positively change the lives of millions in Africa. I'm sure we can all agree that there's really a lot of talent in Africa, and the blockchain ecosystem is evolving at a rapid pace. This is something that we can all be proud of to be a part of. So thank you. Cheers till next time.